Hey, it's me, the RWG, aka the Skay, and today, I bet you wasn't expecting this, were ya? Well, in case people didn't already know, I refuse to be a one-subject channel. So today, we're doing something a bit different, talking about probably some of my earliest gaming experiences with the Atari 2600. I played this wooden wonder in the 90s, since it was pretty much the first console my family had which didn't have a scary looking keyboard. And when I say wooden wonder, I'm not being daft. I mean, look at it. This is like one of the only consoles that actually has something that looks like wood on it. So random and unique by today's standards. The Atari didn't seem like much at the time, but honestly, looking back now, I suppose for me this thing was a bit of an appetizer of a console. Probably a bit of a tastemaker for me, and it started to form my earliest experiences in video gaming. So join me, ladies and gentlemen, as we pay tribute to the Atari 2600 console, its legacy a little bit, and my experiences with the machine. Between my family and a close friend of ours, we didn't exactly have a huge library of Atari games, though it was pretty fortunate that we both had an Atari, so we kinda got to combine those two sets of games together. We had the joystick controllers, paddles, and as I would later find out, Mega Drive Genesis controllers, but more about that weird detail later. I revisited all of these games recently, as well as some games I never owned back in the day on the Atari, to fully remind myself just what it was like. There aren't many Atari games which strike me as amazing, but a lot of them have these little subtle details that my childhood mind wouldn't have noticed, but now as an adult gamer I can notice these little things that are just like things you see all the time in modern gaming. Now you could say, oh big deal, who cares about a game that's like decades and decades old? But you've got to remember, this is pretty much the video game equivalent of black and white movies we're talking about here. Yeah, most people these days will not want to look at these things, but techniques and ideas were first forged from the earliest games in the industry. Honestly, the title is completely misleading. This game might as well be called Pong Megamix, because that's pretty much what it is. You've got your bog standard version of Pong, although now with glorious Atari 2600 colours, and you get all these other weird variations of the game. There is a single player element to some of the modes on the game, but for the most part, this is one of those Atari games where you need a second player or there's basically not much of a game here. It's very competitive orientated, this game. In fact, a lot of Atari games are designed like this, but we'll get to some more of those later. There's also not much footage of it online either, so you'll have to excuse the clearly emulated footage I'm showing on your screen right now. I do remember on one occasion a long time ago, somehow managing to play 4-player with this, which I can only assume was us having 4 of those paddle controllers with the rotational wheel to them. In fact, the controller I still have is designed that way. There's 2 paddle controllers for the first player and the second player, but they're both wired into only one port. So I'm pretty sure I didn't imagine that. At one point we did have 4 controllers which only use 2 controller ports. There's a lot of Atari games which use a similar design philosophy to this, which is having a basic competitive game concept, but lots of different little variations of it to try out. And the fact that this game seems to have 4 players just adds to that even more. I guess that's what you could call a really early concept version of what we would now call different game modes in a video game. I'm not saying Atari is the first company to do this, but I am saying that they definitely played around with the idea to see what they could do with it. There's a lot of Atari games like this, though this is probably the best Pong-related one you can get on the console. And as far as I know, one of the few games with a 4-player mode as well. As long as you have the kit to actually use it. It's a shame the movement on this game is so sluggish, otherwise this would be a cool little top-down versus shooter. Granted, the characters and objects don't actually look top-down, but the game handles everything as if it is. You've got a few different modes here with optional forms of cover from gunfire. You can also make the cover be destructible, you can have ricocheting bullets, you can have guns with limited or unlimited ammo, and there's not much else to say here really. About as sophisticated as the game gets is doing the ricochet shots with the bullets, trying to bait the other person into wasting all their ammo, or the other little detail that if you hold down the shoot button before you let go, you can actually fine aim the shot a little bit more. And that's about it. Pretty good graphics. Probably the first time I saw a video game doing something in 3D, and it doesn't look terrible, right? Except here's the thing. Atari had a lot of what we now know as console ports, and let's just say some things were lost in translation. And yes, for you hardware professionals out there, most of this was recorded on emulators, but I did play the original system. It's just I don't have the kit to record straight from the original system, so compromises. This is the version I played. Yep, as you can see, a pretty obvious graphics downgrade here. Completely different levels, nowhere near as complicated, but still, it's trying to simulate that feeling of a 3D space, even though it doesn't have even close to the hardware it needs to actually create a 3D space in a game world. But this became a very common trick in those days, that any game that was trying to create a 3D world, it was much more common for what I believe they call isometric 3D. This means that the play space, which is acting as a camera, is on a fixed point, with the 3D being at a fixed angle, which isn't actual 3D, but it's trying to look 3D at a particular angle, hence the isometric. It's the sort of thing you've probably seen a lot of if you've ever taken drawing classes. It's a very similar effect. So, what is the objective that you're trying to do on Crystal Castles? In a lot of ways, it's pretty much like Pac-Man. Hell, I'd go as far as to say that there was a period in time where lots of game companies were actually copying Pac-Man in their own way. So by today's standards, would we call those Pac-Man-likes? I don't even know. So yeah, Crystal Castles was a Pac-Man-like, just with jumping mechanics in a isometric 3D space. The jump does give you the ability to dodge some of the enemies coming towards you, but the basic mechanics are pretty much the same as Pac-Man. And just like Pac-Man, the game doesn't actually have an ending. Even the arcade version basically has the creators of the game say that they gave up. It would have been nice to know that back when I played this and I actually cared about finishing it, because this was probably one of the first games that made me pretty angry. It all seems really silly now. I decided to talk about air-sea battle and combat at the same time because they both have quite a big army theme to both of them. In fact, air-sea battle is a pretty early game in the Atari 2600's life, and it mostly consists of various different versions of what's basically a shooting gallery. There's a little bit of movement and aiming you can do depending on the mode you play, but air-sea battle is mostly about timing. Now, combat on the other hand, combat almost plays like a prototype of those old Micro Machine games where you have to press left or right to rotate your vehicle. You got your tanks, you got your various different flying vehicles, you can do 2 against 1, you can against 2 against 2, you can do 3 against 1, there's lots of different variations here. But the real star of the show is some of the strange mechanics you can do, in particular on the tank mode. You can have the bullets ricochet around corners, or my personal favourite is once you've fired a bullet out of the cannon on the tank, you can actually fine adjust it further like you're steering your vehicle. It gives you quite a few opportunities to shoot round corners, which, for a game from the 80s, that's pretty impressive. Like most Atari games, most of the content here is only 2-player versus. There's not much in the way of single-player content. But combat especially is another great example of Atari doing little changes in games to make big differences to how you play them. And in my opinion, it's probably one of the best games on the Atari outside of the Pong clones for having a bit of competitive shenanigans.
What up?
Before Fighter Z, before Xenoverse, before Marvel vs. Capcom, before Smash Brothers, before Tekken, before Virtual Fighter, before Mortal Kombat, before Streets of Rage, before Final Fight, before Street Fighter, before Double Dragon and River City Ransom, there was this game. I did not realize just how important this game was until I played it again. Although, most of you will probably remember it looking like this. Whereas I remember it looking like this. That Atari downgrade, yo. Kung Fu is a prime example of just what a difference little details can make to a game. I don't have the knowledge to say that Kung Fu was the first game to do this, but it does demonstrate an understanding of hitboxes and hurtboxes. Does the character, enemy, or object have a part of it which is dangerous for you to come in contact with? And does the player, enemy, or object have a part of the character which is a weak point, shall we say, that takes damage? Because those are not the same things. When someone throws a punch, it's only the punch that is dangerous. The rest of the body is a weak point. For a game from 1984, that is some sophisticated as hell concepts. And the most surprising thing of all is, this Atari port was made by Activision. Yes, that Activision, the one that only makes shooters now. And it's only now, with adult eyes and more so an understanding of how fighting games work, I can understand why it was so clever for its time, and also why I was having so much trouble playing it. This is going to sound like some standard excuse people make when they play fighting games, but the Atari controller is crap. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, because it's true. So a game like Kung Fu becomes a bit of a headache trying to do the moves you want to do when you have to use an Atari controller, because you've got the low punch, the low kick, the high punch, the high kick, etc. Of all the games I played, this is maybe the best Atari game I have a physical copy of. So because of that, I was then looking into ways to try and beat this game. And the help I needed came from an unusual source.
Did you know that you can plug a Sega Genesis controller into an Atari 2600 and it'll work? See, that's the interesting thing about Atari. You can find all kinds of different stuff that's compatible.
I'm sure it was listed on the internet somewhere as well, but without Video Game Nerd's video about the Atari, it never would have even crossed my mind to try this. And you know what? Thank you for making a video about this, because not only did it work, I beat the game for the first time. It's like I finally have closure. Thanks for that. Yeah, I know the Atari version doesn't technically have an ending, but I did one cycle of all the levels, so that's probably about as close to an ending for this game as I'm going to get. So thank you, Nintendo Nerd, for that piece of information. And while I'm at it, yo, shout outs to Screw Attack and Game Trailers too. Yes, I know one of those is dead, and the other one is working on joining them. Please don't write that in the comments. It's Space Invaders Atari Edition, so it has the typical kind of look you'd expect. However, it does have some tricks of its own too. different gunners, making it easier or harder to dodge bullets, turning cover from bullets on or off, or have it constantly move around the screen, and maybe the most interesting addition of all, 2-player. Although you do share lives, so choose your partner wisely on this one. So what else is there to say about a game brand this famous? Well, I guess the part where the aliens go faster is just as scary, if not worse, than the arcade version. Jesus Christ! And your gunner's death animation is weird. What the hell is even going on here? It looks like what would happen if Kermit the Frog and Miss Eno had a baby. Someone somewhere will get offended by me saying this, but screw it. There's a lot of golf video games out there, and most of them suck. This one being a rare exception, except Atari Golf looks nothing like that. A lot of golf games, even when they work well, are just boring to watch and play, especially for kids. But Atari Golf is just plain cruel to give to a stupid kid like I was back in the day. For starters, it's practically impossible to get a hole-in-one. Not because hole-in-ones are and should be difficult to do, but because of the way this game handles everything. You physically can't do it. There's no arrow aiming or anything smart like that, heavens no. Your aim changes relative to your position on the ball with the golf club and character turning around like something off an analog ticking clock, using the golf club as like a hand on the clock or some craziness, I don't know, it's stupid. When the ball gets close to the hole, the game does this weird thing where it zooms in on the hole, but Atari style. And now your character is about the size of an action figure because yay, limited hardware. And God help you if you knock your ball out of bounds, because the sand traps are less cruel than this shit. Soon as the ball goes out of bounds, does it come back in? Hell no! It turns invisible and you're left trying to hunt around trying to use your golf club like a goddamn metal detector. I'm going to pull an angry video game nerd here and just say, what were they thinking? There was zero reason to make the ball invisible, and I hope the coder who did this received complaints and had sleepless nights over what a stupid idea that was. It almost single-handedly ruins the game, let alone the super sensitive golf club aiming. Avoid this unless you have the patience of a saint or you're doing some kind of crazy Atari game research. If you want an early example of video game marketing, this is a good game to do some research into. Hell, you're hearing a theme tune right now that was made as part of the marketing for this game. And honestly, one of the reasons I did that is because I kind of find the sound effects in this game to be on the annoying side. That weird constant buzzing noise, I can only assume is supposed to be the wings flapping on the craft that you're flying? Yeah, I find that sound really annoying, which is a shame because I think everything else in the game, for an Atari game, is alright. For the fans out there who really like Yars Revenge, you're gonna have to bear with me because I don't know any of the terminology, but you play as that flying craft on the left hand side there, which almost looks like a bug, and you're supposed to destroy that thing surrounded by a barrier on the right. But here's the thing, back in the day I had no idea how to do that. So, I found the answer on the internet, but not in the place that you'd think I'd find it.
So the first thing you should do is head right in front of the wall and begin blasting out a section of blocks to expose this guy here, known as a cotile. Keep on the move to avoid collision with the enemy missile. Once you have carved a large enough hole from the wall, arm your Zorlon cannon, either by biting a block or by running over the cotile. Once the cannon is armed, a colored block will appear on the left side of the screen, and the next time you hit the fire button, this block will take off horizontally. Notice how the block moves up and down with the yar. That's how you aim the cannon. When you see a good shot at the cotile, press the fire button and immediately move yar out of the way. If your shot is successful, you'll see this on the screen. As the effect dies out, you have enough time before the next wave begins to do a little victory dance with your Yar. Notice how he wraps around from the top and bottom edges of the screen. The second wave features revolving blocks, and it seems you have to wipe out every block before a shot from the Zorlan cannon would penetrate to the Kotile. Not true. Concentrate on one area of the wall and carve out a channel. Now just be patient and avoid collision with the enemy energy missile. When the channel presents itself in alignment with the Kotile, let go a shot and bingo, one dead Kotile. Now and then the Kotile turns into a swirl that spins, makes noise, and takes off for Yar at high speed. To dodge the swirl every time, position Yar near the top or bottom and simply duck off screen as the swirl fires. The key to mastering Yars Revenge is by killing a moving swirl, which gains you an extra life. If that's too difficult, go for the stationary swirls. Arm the Zorlan cannon, position Yar, and nail the swirl as it appears for bonus points.
Okay, the angry video game nerd was one thing, but this video predates the internet as we know it, let alone YouTube and the angry video game nerd. This just kind of adds really to my theory that America and Asia are like at least a decade, if not more, ahead of the rest of the world in terms of their understanding and appreciation of video games. But yeah, that video pretty much covers everything about this game, except for maybe the instruction manual or the marketing, if that's something you're interested in. Oh yeah, and the tiny little detail that Howard Scott Warshaw, the same coder who made the E.T. Atari game, was the guy who made this, but it's not like that's important or anything. Once you understand how to play Yars Revenge, it's really not that complicated. Which really doesn't leave me with much to talk about, unless you want me to quote a bunch of things off of Wikipedia or something, pretending I know about stuff. So, let's move on. So, after spending way too much time coming up with this video and then finally making it, what are my final thoughts on the Atari 2600? Well, to quote Indiana Jones, it belongs in a museum. But when I say that, I mean it with all the love in the world, because I understand the importance of what the Atari 2600 did back in the day. In a lot of ways, creating the beginnings of the video game market, which would then be filled by all the famous people you can think of: Nintendo, Sega, Sony, Microsoft, you get the picture. I understand the importance of Atari now, and all the ideas they experimented with, which then gave ideas to future games from other publishers in the video game industry. There isn't really much here for me to see anymore that I don't already know. I feel this so strongly, in fact, that I don't even feel like I have a reason to hang on to the Atari anymore. But at the same time, I still want this to be preserved, so this Atari is either going to a good home or some sort of museum. It's 2018, you could fit the entire collection of Atari games that have ever been made onto a memory card device that's the size of a SIM card that you put into a phone. And when it comes to emulation being a thing as well, it really reduces any need I would have to hang on to the machine, except the bragging rights of like, yeah, I actually have one. Which is just not something that's important to me anymore, really, unless I was planning on becoming some kind of video game teacher. We might remember games consoles, but we remember the games a hell of a lot more. And with the exception of a few games like Video Game Olympics, which was basically the glorified Pong collection with the paddle controllers, pretty much most of this stuff could be emulated without much difficulty. For the purists out there, yeah, it's not the same thing. In fact, you're probably annoyed that most of the footage in this video wasn't recorded from original hardware. But that's the thing about being a purist. You guys are unique in that you want the purest possible original experience you can get. A lot of other people would just be happy with trying out the games and seeing what was good and bad about them. If you ever have the opportunity to try out an Atari 2600, like at an event or something like that, I'd say give it a shot, just so you can get a feeling of what it was like. But Unless you're a diehard collector, I don't feel like it's worth getting hold of one of these, despite how important they were to the video game industry. But I've already talked way too much on this video about emulators, so to counteract that a little bit, if you want to play a lot of these games, I recommend buying something from the Steam store called the Atari Vault. It doesn't have all the games that I showed here, but it has some games I didn't talk about, as well as some of the arcade versions as well. So what's the best way to end this kind of a bittersweet video about Atari? One of the beautiful things about the internet, which I hope never ever changes, is there are hundreds of people with their own stories of Atari and videos they've made, facts they've gathered and learned themselves that they put into videos too. If anything, I'm a little bit late to the party and I've only scratched the surface. I highly recommend, if you're interested in the Atari, that you look up more videos. I'll also put some links in the description for anyone who's curious about where some of this awesome music I'm using comes from. But we still haven't answered the question, what's the best way to end this video? Well, I suppose the best way to end it would be a quote by Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari. Atari showed that young people could start big companies. Without that example, it would have been harder for Jobs and Bill Gates and people who came after them to do what they did.